Hello everyone. Another episode of Harold Tribune World Youth Forum from 1954. This episode youngsters talk about what is the proper purpose of a high school education and participated following students. Paolo FILIPPINI from Italy. Lesley SCHOLES from Australia. KUM CHUEN YUEN from Singapore. Usha THADANI KINNON from India. Presenter of the discussion is Mrs. Helen Height-Waller. Here we go to the video.
This is National Educational Television, a program distributed by the Educational Television and Radio Center.
What is the proper purpose of a high school education?
The proper purpose of a high school education is to educate students, and American high schools don't do this.
I disagree with you completely, Paolo. America is educating citizens. In Italy, you are producing a group of frustrated intellectuals.
The purpose of a high school education should be moral development as well as physical and intellectual. The American schools do not do this.
I think the purpose of high school education should be to produce well-balanced minds. And for that, both theoretical and practical learning is necessary. In America, your high schools emphasize practical learning, and we in India have been in the past emphasizing theoretical learning.
This is the world we want, with young people from the four corners of the globe brought together by the New York Herald Tribune Forum for High Schools. Here to discuss the world we want under the direction of Helen Height-Waller.
During the past week, the 34 high school forum delegates have had a chance to augment their experience in American education, which had been confined to high schools. During the past week, the 34 have been guests on campus at Sarah Lawrence College. Now, the four representatives of the 34 who are here for tonight's discussion are first Paolo FILIPPINI from Italy. Paolo's been the strong, silent type, saying very little in discussions, just listening intently, but from his opening sally tonight, I gather he's going to start changing his role. Lesley SCHOLES from Australia is our champion debater. On the opening program in this series, she ardently defended admission of Communist China into the UN against the Philippine delegate. Well, we changed roles in Washington and made them each defend the opposite point of view, and she did it with equal eloquence. From Singapore is KUM CHUEN. He was described by his first American high school faculty advisor as a Chinese gentleman with Methodist overtones. I think UN's most shattering experience since he's been in America was his introduction to enforceable consumption of an awful, right? That's something they eat in teenage ice cream bars. Usha THADANI from Italy has been the envy of all the other girls during our past 2 weeks of travel to Richmond and Washington and Bronxville, because when the other girls take their dresses out of the suitcase, they have to run for an electric iron. But Usha has her saris folded like sheets in her suitcase, and so she never has that trouble. Well, what is the proper purpose of a high school education? Where do we start?
Well, I find that the schools in America have very good physical and intellectual development, but they lack one thing, and that is moral development. And I think that the teaching of religion should be included in the curriculum.
Your point is good, Chuen, except for the unfortunate fact that it must be applied to American schools. You know that American schools is formed by Jews as well as Catholics and Protestants. Now the question is, what religion are you going to teach to these students?
Paolo, I agree with you there, but then instead of religion, I don't think you could manage to teach religion, because you do have lots of religions represented in a school. But I think you should emphasize on religion in a sort of an indirect way and teach them ethics instead of teaching them a definite religion. But do you think that the teaching of ethics is going to raise the moral standard of students? Well, certainly. Don't you think so? No, I don't think so. I feel this whole point about religion's something very personal. I don't think you can teach that to somebody. Well, in any case, I think it's worth a try because it's been done all over the East for quite a long time, and well.
Yes, the mission schools in Singapore have scripture as a compulsory subject, and all the kids have to take that. And I find that in doing this, it helps to build up the character of all the students.
No, I disagree with you. I don't think we should learn scripture. Why should we learn the scriptures of Christianity?
Yes, I'm talking about the schools run by the missions.
Even
by
so, I don't
missions.
think we should be forced to learn scripture. No, what scriptures are you going to teach here in American schools?
Oh, well, we can use the Bible as a standard book.
But there's still a lot of Jewish students attend
Lesley,
schools.
let me interrupt. Do you have this problem in Australia, this discussion of whether or not religion should be taught in the schools?
Yes, it is.
How are you solving it there?
Well, I don't know whether we're solving it, but we do have one period a week of religious instruction, and there it is not taught along any special lines. There is a Christian class where all Christians can attend, and a Jewish class. And it's not compulsory for students to attend these classes.
Excuse me just a minute. I wonder if you would agree with Paolo. You think it's good to teach religion in your schools, but would you agree that in America, the way our schools are set up, it is a different problem?
Well, I think that it should be all right because the students in the schools in Singapore are from different religions. For example, we have Christians, Buddhists, Confucianists, and Hindus too. But we do not take scripture as seriously as some of us Paolo might take it. Well, we learn the teachings of Christ, and we learn the morals in the Bible. And in this way, I think it helps to build up the character of the students to a great extent. For example, every Friday, we have invited speakers to address us during our chapel services. And I think that these chapel talks, mostly are based on religious topics. I think they play a very great part in the building up of the students'
No, I don't think students should be taught a religion that they're not interested in, but I think if they could do what they have in your schools, Lesley, teach them various religions so that different pupils could go to the different religions that interested them. And of course, we in India don't have that problem. It's sort of novel in India in that in our Indian schools they teach them the religion because Hinduism is the religion of most of the people who attend those schools. And in our Western schools, which are based on the Western type of education, they teach us moral science and ethics.
Could we agree to disagree on this subject
Yes.
of whether religion should be taught in what schools?
Well, I think in the schools in India, you should follow the teachings of your own prophets. And well, anyway, you should have some moral teachings. And I find that down here, due to the absence of this, you find that the rate of juvenile delinquency here is pretty high. And back home, although I must admit that there is juvenile delinquency in every country, I must admit that in my country too, as in any country. Usually the crimes are committed by the illiterate, and the educated people usually do not commit such crimes.
Well, can we move on from this point of religion to some of the other purposes of high school education?
Well, Paolo, I'd like to ask you what you meant when you said that Americans don't educate their students.
Well, I have found that the philosophy of education in America is based on some theories which refuses certain values which are an everlasting conquest of mankind, of a human soul, mind, I should say. These values are represented by what particularly endowed characters, I mean geniuses, have created in past centuries, be it artistical or philosophical. That's my point. I think that there is no interest, or at least no great interest, in for example, in classical languages. You can object that they learn Latin in school, but I can answer you that there is a terrible decreasing in the teaching and learning of Latin.
In America?
In America,
Do you know
of
what the
course.
statistics are on that by chance?
Well, unfortunately, I can't remember the exact statistics.
I think I saw that only 40 schools
Yeah,
in the New
that's
York
true.
area now
Yeah, yeah.
teach Latin.
Latin.
Well,
What
the
do you
rest
want
of
them to learn dead languages
Yes.
for?
Well, they are not exactly, they are dead, that's true, but they are a means to understand what some particularly genius, well, they thought and expressed.
Yes, but you can learn that through translations. What do you want to learn Latin?
Well, the Latin plays an important role in the learning of English language. I should say that
you
about
can learn English without
40% of
knowing
English words are derived from Latin.
Yes, but
and
there
it
are
is
other things besides Latin. Latin's not just the foundation of education. There's other things that they learn. They're being educated. I mean, you just can't say, well, American students are not being educated. They don't learn Latin.
Lesley, you disagreed so completely with Paolo. He objects to our lack of classical and humanist education. You said you disagreed with him completely. How would you say the American students are being educated?
Well, I feel they are being educated in that they're being educated for the type of world they have to live in. I admit that I feel that there is a lack of, say, teaching of world history, teaching of Latin perhaps, but just the same, the average student is being educated. He's being educated to take his place in society as a citizen. He's being educated to go into some vocation. He's being given a broad general education that I'm quite sure that just an average student, some student of average intelligence...
Well, excuse me, Lesley, but I don't think they have a good education. For example...
You're talking about the Americans now.
Yeah, I am talking about American students. For example, I have discovered that they don't study too much. They devote a maximum of 2 hours, at a minimum of nothing, to studying, to doing their homework.
But do you know the reason why? You see, it's because that they can't push this, they haven't yet found a way to push the standard up for the brilliant students. They're keeping that standard down because they want to educate everyone. But I can see that they are trying to raise the standard because Lesley, in many of the classes they're divided, they're graded according to their ability. Yes, but I agree with you partly and partly with Paolo because you said that they get a broad and general education. I certainly don't think so. And you said that they're educated for the world that they have to live in. Well, I disagree with you there because they're educated to live in a world that sort of involves only America, and that's all.
Yes,
and
I agree with you.
and especially now, since the world is getting more and more interested in the other nations, they just know about their own country, and that's about all.
But Usha, what about their teaching of current events and world problems?
Yes, but current events, they only learn the current events insofar as America is involved in them, and from the American point of view. They have no idea whatsoever of the other side of the question.
But isn't that better than not learning them at all?
Well, yes, but we were discussing the aims.
How about you, Paolo? Do you have current events and world politics, contemporary politics in your Italian humanistic school?
I have to make a remark which does not turn out in favor, unfortunately, of my country. We have a terrible gap in the learning of our history. The past 30 years are not studied at all in our school. The teaching of history stops at the end of World War I, and after that the events are as if they had not happened for us.
Well, but how do your young people, I'm sure you must discuss current politics. Goodness
Well,
knows
not in school, and there is a definite reason for that. These events are too close to us, and we can't discuss about them objectively. We can't keep objective in discussing them. When the chance of talking propaganda is so alluring, you know, we have got plenty of different opinions. They range from the communist point of view to a fascist point of view.
Are there still fascists in Italy among the young people, or fascist thinking?
Well, yes, there are still fascists, but I have to point out the fact that they represent only a minority. Well, the fascist party has still a strong appeal to our youth because it represents, it embodies the nationalistic feeling of our country. Because the Christian Democrats are considered to be too closely linked with America's policy, while communist policy, communists obey the orders of from Moscow, and so the fascist party represents like a middle way, you know, and that's why many, not many, I have to point out this fact, but a few people are fascists.
Well, that's an original interpretation of fascism in the scheme of things. Let's come back to this point on in some of the other schools. Do you have teaching of current history and current events like you find in American schools?
Well, to come back to the point, we in India never used to have that in the past, and in fact we have found, and our government is finding now, that the Indian education has emphasized very much on the past, and the result has been that people tend to live on the past glories, and that's all. But now in our schools, they are emphasizing more and more on current events and things like that. And of course we are getting even more practical and having vocational training, and because, well, actually the aim of high school education is in a way concerned with the aim and the goal of the country as a whole. And now, well, we have a lot of poverty in India, and you find that a lot of people in India just starve because they have no skill to go in for any trade or profession. And so the government is finding it necessary to emphasize vocational training and basic education in the schools in order to train them to be able to take up some trade.
Do you know anything about village India? Have you ever been in the villages?
Yes, I have.
Can you tell us something about the new trend toward education?
Well, people are getting more and more interested in education. Well, it was rather difficult for the government to make the people realize that everyone should be educated, because it was something so new to them that they, well, people always suspect something new. But now that they have come to realize, they are being very enthusiastic about it. And you find that in these schools, through the community projects, the people are building their own schools for their children. And in the adult education centers, they go there in the night time after their daily work, after their hard work in the fields, and the women sometimes work in the fields too. And they go in there, and they usually study by candlelight. Usually there's just about one lantern in the whole room, or usually they sit outside if it's during summer. And sometimes they don't even have any paper or pencils to write with, and they usually learn the letters by smoothing the sand on the floor and writing on the floor.
That is a picture that we would do well to know more about. I'm sure it's an essential part of your changing educational system. Yuen, if I can interrupt once more, I'd like to ask you about this new university in Singapore that Lin Yu Tang is. Every American almost knows Lin Yu Tang. Do you know about his university there?
Very recently, some Chinese millionaires have realized that we do not have enough higher school education for the students in the Chinese schools, and so they have banded themselves together and have raised a lot of money to build a new university, and have invited Dr. Lin Yu Tang to be the chancellor. It seems as though that the main purpose of this is to discourage the young Chinese from going back to China to further their education. You see, we do not have, we have got only one local university at present, and in that university we have English as the medium of instruction, and their English, the standard of English is very high, and so these Chinese students just simply can't get in there. And in building this new university, we are trying to dissuade the Chinese students from going back to China.
Mrs. Waller,
yes.
Could I just get back to this point of what Usha said about education? We have to look at it from the view of a country's ideals. Getting back to this point that America only teaches current events from an American point of view and the lack of world history, don't you think that could be connected with America's ideals? Because in the past she had this isolationist policy, and therefore she had no interest in the outside world. So they thought there was no need, more or less, to teach world history. But don't you think that the mere fact that America's policy towards the world is changing now, that they are taking more interest in the outside world, that they will teach more world history? Well, it's taking them a very long time to do that.
Yes, but it's taking other countries a long time to realize that there's more than just the brilliant students needing to be educated.
Well, that's true.
Did you accept Lesley's point that you're just making a lot of frustrated intellectuals in Italy?
Well, not exactly. The fact that most of our intellectuals can't get a job is due to our problem of overpopulation. It's not due to the defect of our education, which I believe is true, fundamentally true, while I still point out the fact that I think that the American education is fundamentally wrong because, I repeat, it's based on a philosophy which refuses these values I believe in.
May I disagree with you?
Yeah, you may.
You said that, the fact that the people there didn't have jobs was because it was overpopulated.
Of course.
But don't you think that if the system of education was changed and they were trained for practical things, perhaps they could build up more industries so that you wouldn't have the
I
problem of
can't
overpopulation?
give you an explanation on this point. Don't think that all our students go to the same type of high school I go to. Only a minority, 30%.
Yes.
While the other students go to what we call professional training school,
Yes,
where they
but-
are training for getting a job and
But
making a
how
living.
are they chosen to go to these
Yes.
schools? They're not chosen according to ability. That's just according to the financial situation of their
Oh, well,
parents.
that's true. That's the fact.
Which you would
They
like
should
to
choose
change.
according to their ability, according to the capacity of their mind.
Yes, well, if you could change, if you agree with us on that should
Anyway-
be changed. We agree basically.
Anyway, I can give you a
Italian education's
personal.
wrong.
Wait a minute. I can give you a personal example, which shows how many people are trying and actually are getting a higher education. My father is a bus driver, and I'm getting a higher education. I am still, an
Yes, but
exception.
then you
But
agree
this-
with us. You agree with us that it should be that you shouldn't emphasize only on the humanistic courses. That you should have both, and students should be selected according to abilities.
Yes.
Well, of course.
Well, we agree on a sort of a compromise.
Yes,
Well,
we
I
agree.
agree on a sort of compromise.
American education is
Anyway.
But so that wasn't exactly what I meant. There should be one set of schools which emphasize just on the humanistic studies, and the other schools which emphasize only on the practical subjects. I think you should have the midway schools which give you both.
Yeah, that's true. But I got
Oh.
another criticism to American system education.
Good.
I found that there is uniformity of education in this country. Now, uniformity of education does not mean democratic education. You need a variety of education.
Well,
Do you
it's
understand what you mean?
It's not
What I mean?
exactly uniform. It is uniform, but it's not that they're offered only those subjects. They have a wide choice, a range of subjects from which
Well,
to
but
choose.
when
But
the-
let me finish. The thing is that the students choose the same subjects. That's the students' fault, not the school's fault.
Well, but when the average student leaves his high school, he thinks just the same way as the other students. I can't tell you a difference between students graduated from high school. They just, I should say,
That's
think
true.
the same way.
There is
you
more,
know, they got the same level of
similarity
education.
between
Why don't
the American high school students than I suppose there is between other high school
Couldn't you
students in other
explain that
countries.
because there is such a strong nationalist feeling in this country, at least I've found it so, more so than in Australia, and because everything's presented from an American point of view, from American democracy the best.
That's
American
true.
education, it's still thought of, everyone criticizes it, but still, you've got a very good education, this sort of
Leslie,
attitude.
that's true, but don't you think that the aim of high school education should be wider than that? Should give them a sort of American high school education gives them a very good education in being a citizen of America. But now that the world is getting, as it said, a smaller place, don't you think it should be wider, so they're given a training rather in world education than in national education? I mean, in world citizenship rather than in national citizenship?
Well, if by world citizenship you mean a better understanding of world problems,
yes.
I agree with you. But you can understand foreign problems by understanding your own problems first.
Well, don't you
Well-
think American people understand their own problems?
They've done that for quite some time, and it's
Well,
about time they shifted to
That's
the other
what
thing.
I'm trying to say, that an education must be primarily nationalistic education.
Well, that's what they've got
No,
here.
they have it, but you
Well,
see,
yeah.
even when they are studying their own problems, don't you think it would do them good to study
Yes,
their own
definitely.
problems from the other nation's point of views?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Leslie,
Look, then they're being so one-sided. How do you
Yes,
expect
they
the
are.
world to progress?
Don't you think
let me come back to just one point that was dropped too quickly when you said we educate the big majority, but you felt we didn't pay enough attention to the gifted.
Yes.
In America, we look at people with special learning problems as not only the gifted, but also the slow learners and the handicapped. And I think you'll find in a democracy that any special problem, whether it's the very bright or the handicapped or the slow learner, has to come, but it comes after the big majority.
Yes,
I wonder if you're in
that's
your
true.
countries that do so much for the top 1% of the intellectuals have the same concern for the bottom 1% of the handicapped.
No, that's
that's
the, that's just the
country.
difference.
Look, unfortunately, time is running away with us. It always does this, but maybe you'd be willing, in conclusion, to point to just one thing in your countries that you have that you would like to contribute to American high schools or American high school education?
I would add to the curriculum of American high school the study of Dante's Divine Comedy. A person can't be well educated without knowing Dante.
Well, even though this is a public service program, we'll permit you that commercial for Italy, Paolo. What have you got to say?
Well,
Leslie?
mine's nothing as world-shattering. I'd just like to address it to the girls. I think that they should take much more interest and participate in sports more instead of just being content to be spectators at the boys' basketball games all the time.
UN?
Well, I think the schools down there should have a wider curriculum instead of emphasizing only on the physical and mental education. I think you should include the third one, that is moral education.
You're still sticking strong to your point on religion, are you?
Well, the three of you seem to emphasize what you'd like to give to America, and I think I'll tell you what we'd like to get from America, not only we, but the other nations in the East. What we'd like to get from America is to have more of the practical subjects taught in our countries, and that's what we in India are doing at present.
Thank you. I'm sorry our time is up. You've been listening to 4 of the 34 high school forum delegates, Paolo FILIPPINI, who comes from Florence in Italy, Lesley SCHOLES from Australia, KUM CHUEN from Singapore, and Usha THADANI from Italy. Next week, we'll be talking about, will Europe ever unite?